Well, Dad is Francis Gary Powers. He was a CIA U-2 pilot in the 1950s, ends up being shot down over the Soviet Union on May 1st of 1960, creates an international incident. Eisenhower gets caught lying. Khrushchev ends up banging his shoe at the UN. Dad gets in a Soviet prison cell for almost 2 years. As a result of that shoot down, the American government wanted to get him back. The Soviet government wanted to get one of their agents back, Rudolph Abel. So after some negotiations behind the scenes, those two individuals were exchanged at the Glennecker Bridge in Potsdam, Germany on February 10th of 1962.
What are some of the myths or misconceptions that you found? Because you've studied this, you've written books on the topic. What are some things that you found that are misconceptions that people believe that really didn't happen?
Oh, sure. At the time when my father was shot down, it was easier to blame the pilot than to publicly admit we were behind the Soviets in missile technology. Our missiles at the time couldn't reach that altitude. If ours can't reach that altitude, theirs can't. We're ahead of them. Cold War mentality. Right. It was easier to blame the pilot than to further embarrass a U.S. President, Eisenhower, who had been caught lying about this incident. His administration said it was a weather research flight. In fact, it was a CIA spy flight. Some other misconceptions. Armchair generals is what I like to call them. People who say, he should have done this, he should have done that. Well, if it was me, I would have done it this way. Yeah. Well, they weren't there.
Right.
And as a result, rumors, speculation, fake news, misinformation was circulating. Basically saying he defected, he landed the plane intact, he spilled his guts and collaborated with the enemy, or he didn't follow orders and commit suicide. Now, it is true that the CIA pilots were given the option of taking a quote-unquote suicide device with them on these missions. It was explained to them that if you're caught, you will be tortured. Here is a way to alleviate the pain and suffering. A small needle dipped in poison, hidden in a silver dollar. It was an optional device to take, an optional device to use at the pilot's discretion in the event of torture, not in the event of capture. But because my father didn't use it, the Soviets said, oh, look at these evil Americans. This is what they give their spy pilots to commit suicide with. This one wanted to live to see another day. And from that moment on, Dad had disobeyed orders in the public's mind. But again, there were no orders to take it, no orders to use it. It was at the pilot's discretion. The orders, and I have to paraphrase, if capture appears imminent, the pilot should take a cooperative attitude toward their captors. They are perfectly free to tell them what their mission is, to take photographs, but they should not talk about specifications of the equipment on board the airplane or the capability of the airplanes itself. So my father followed his orders to a T while in captivity.
Okay. Your father passed away, you were 12, I believe, correct?
Correct.
Well, did he ever discuss with you anything about that incident, about his time in prison or anything? I know you were only 12, you're young. Right. He must have talked about it at least a little bit.
Yes, he did. Yeah. He wrote a book in 1970 called Operation Overflight, and it was his account of what he had gone through. Things in 70 are still classified. It's the middle of the Cold War. The U-2 program was still in its heyday, so he can't put everything in it he wants, but he's able to get it out for public consumption. When I'm about 10 years old, 1975, 1976 when I'm 11, I start to read this book. And I would read a chapter or a few pages. He'd come into the bedroom at night to tuck me into bed, and I'd ask him a couple of questions here and there. Some of those questions I have a vague memory of. Others I have forgotten. I was, 10 and 12 years old. That's 45 years ago now or so. Yeah. But one of the questions I remember asking him, because I was curious, Dad, how high were you flying on May 1st when you were shot down? And he would explain to me, Gary, I can't tell you that. If I tell you, you tell your friends tell their parents, the parents tell someone else, I could be putting pilots' lives, the airplane in jeopardy. So I can't tell you. And I'd pester him every day. Dad, how high were you flying? And eventually, he must have had a bad day at work. He was flustered. He comes in the door. I went up to him. Hey, Dad, how are you? Welcome home. How high were you flying on May 1st? Kind of scowls at me. I wasn't flying high enough that day. Go to bed. So I remember that specific dialogue. I asked him about being tortured. Were you tortured while you were in prison? And he explained to me that he was not physically tortured. There was no physical abuse, but there was mental abuse, sleep deprivation, bright spotlight, grueling questions, threats of death, but no physical abuse, thank goodness. During my research over the last 35 plus years, I found out why he was not tortured. He was too high profile an individual. A KGB retiree that I was able to talk to in Moscow during one of my trips there indicated that he was so high profile, the Soviets wanted to show the world how nice they were, how humble they are, what a great country they are. So they did not physically abuse my dad. They abused him mentally during the interrogations, but not physically. And that was a propaganda rouge to embarrass the United States.
Did he ever talk to you about his feelings, that how he felt when he found out that people had accused him of being a traitor or wanting to defect? Did he ever talk about that at all? That made him feel?
He did talk about it during his lectures when he was living. I did not ask him questions about that. I was naive as a kid. I didn't understand it.
Right.
But in my research, having read his book, having read his notes, having listened to his audio tapes that he recorded, I was able to get a really good idea of what he felt like. And as far as he was concerned, he did not care what other people thought he should or should not have done. He knew that he did everything he was supposed to do under the circumstance he found himself in. He followed his orders to a T, and he was very comfortable with the decisions he made. Yeah.
I find it strange that they weren't really given instructions, okay, if you get shot down, this is what you need to do, this is how you need to act.
Right.
You went through survival training when he was in the Air Force, but do you believe that's because they just didn't think they would need that information because they weren't getting shot down?
That's a good question, and let me answer what I know. My dad, during one of his briefing sessions as a U-2 pilot, asked that question. What should we do if we're shot down? What should we do if we go down behind enemy lines? And the CIA briefer basically said, you might as well tell them everything. They'll get it out of you anyways, expecting to be tortured.
Right.
And to my father's credit, once he was shot down, he's taken to Lubyanka prison. Lubyanka is the infamous KGB prison adjacent to and part of the KGB headquarters in downtown Moscow. So during the first week of his interrogations, he is lying to his captors outright, holding back as much information as possible, trying to mislead them any way he can. But then on May 5th, Khrushchev announces to the world they've shot down an American spy plane. On May 7th, Eisenhower releases a press statement that it's an unarmed weather research plane that accidentally strayed across the border. Then a few days go by again. Khrushchev comes back up to center stage. Aha, we also have the pilot, Gary Powers, alive and kicking. Yeah. So when that happened, international press around the world start to appear. U-2 shot down, summit conference in jeopardy, Eisenhower caught lying. So the KGB guard in charge, on or about May 10th, copy of the New York Times, rushes into the interrogation chamber, shoves the newspaper in Dad's face, yells at him, "You've lied to us. You told us you were trained in Arizona. Well, the New York Times says you were trained in Nevada at Area 51. You might as well tell us everything. We'll get it out of your American press anyways." So now Dad is stuck between a rock and a hard place. If he tells the full truth, he's given away secrets. If he lies to him and gets caught, he can get shot, face the death penalty for espionage. So for the 3 months of his interrogations, he does the following. He tells the full truth when he knows they can verify it in the press. That gives him credibility. He lies to him outright when he knows there's no way they can find out the answers. And then he dances around the question, part truth, part lie, when he knows that they know something about the question they're asking, but not enough to contradict his answer, such as the altitude he was flying. He always maintained he was at the maximum altitude of 68,000 feet when he was shot down. And he did that for 2 reasons. First, close enough to be believable, yet far enough away to keep other pilots out of harm's way. U-2s would fly between 70 and 75,000 feet on operational missions. Dad wanted to convince the Soviets to explode their warhead at 68,000 feet, creating a 2,000 to 7,000 foot buffer between where the missiles would explode and where the planes were flying. The other reason, he wanted to get a message back home to his employer, the CIA. hey guys, I'm not telling the full truth. And that was eventually discovered when it was brought back home and debriefed.
Right. And they got the transcripts of that are available. I mean,
correct.
To find out exactly what he said.
The transcripts from the trial are available through certain online platforms and in books, as well as the CIA debriefing transcripts. I think every tape except one is available on the CIA website, cia.gov. And if you look up Gary Powers, then you'll find his debriefing transcripts. Some of it is still a little bit, what do you call it?
Redacted.
Redacted, correct. But a majority of it is out there.
There was a lot of opposition. I guess a lot of maybe animosity. I don't know. Alan Dulles believed that he had descended too low, and that's why he got shot down. RFK wanted to try him for treason. He was snubbed by JFK. In your book, you say that your father was not mad at the world. Can you expand on that a little bit? Does it just didn't bother him?
Well, sure.
These are pretty big names that are.
Oh, yeah. Let me tell one story quickly, and then we'll go through those other details. In June. Three people, Alan Dulles, head of the CIA, President Eisenhower, and Kelly Johnson, the designer of the airplane. All three gave a speech somewhere in June of 1960. As if on script, and I think they were, they all said the most likely reason the U-2 was shot down is that the pilot had to descend beforehand. They don't have the missiles to get to 70,000 feet. So it had to be the pilot's fault, or a flame out, or mechanical malfunction, or something made the plane descend first. But again, like I've said, he was at his assigned altitude when the missile exploded. But at the time, easier to blame the pilot than to admit publicly we were behind the Soviets in technology. Now, with Alan Dulles saying he descended, Robert Kennedy, Attorney General at the time, wanted to try my father as a traitor to make a name for himself. But then after Dad was cleared by the U.S. Senate, there's no way you're going to go into that. He was supposed to have met with JFK, President Kennedy, after the Senate Select Committee hearing. But RFK said, oh, no, you don't want to associate, you know, he's going to be found guilty. You don't want to have your name associated with him. So they canceled that meeting. Snubbed by that administration. But as it turned out, Dad was cleared by the U.S. Senate. He got a standing ovation in the chambers for his performance is the wrong word, for his interactions with the senators and answering the questions. Yeah.
So none of it bothered him. It just
no. He had a very good head on his shoulders. He didn't care what other people thought. He knew that what he did was the right things to do. Yeah.
In the letters that your father, and this is in your book, that your father sent your mother, sent your grandparents.
Okay, hold on.
I'm sorry. His wife, not your mother. His wife.
Correct.
Your grandparents, his parents. There's a lot of him apologizing. I regret this. Right. I'm sorry. Why do you think he had guilt over this?
He didn't have guilt over the missions, right, or getting captured. There's nothing he could do to prevent that. He had guilt over the worry and the suffering that he thought he was causing his mom, who was sickly, who had a heart condition, who he was fearful could have a heart attack and pass away because of the stress and anxiety he was putting her under as a prisoner of war.
Did he ever express? He was Air Force pilot, and the choice to be work for the CIA, fly the U-2 was strictly left up to him. That was an opportunity was presented to him. He decided to take it. Correct. Ever regret that choice later in life? And maybe I should have taken the other route.
I don't think he regretted it. He loved what he did, both as a fighter pilot flying F-84s in the military, Air Force, and then after being recruited into the CIA, flying the U-2. He loved that plane. He loved those missions. He was doing something patriotic for his country, something very dangerous, something that was very well compensated for, but he just loved to fly. He was a pilot. That's all he ever wanted to do. So he had no regrets about what career paths he took. His first wife and him, when first approached to be in the CIA in this capacity, they both thought it would help advance his career. Now, had he not been shot down, he would have retired like all of his other squadron members, colonels or generals. But since he was the known spy, the Air Force didn't want to take him back in because they would be accused of employing spies. Right. The CIA couldn't use him. His cover is blown. He can't be a CIA pilot. So Kelly Johnson in 1963 comes to the rescue, offers Dad a job as a Lockheed test pilot as long as he can pass the mental and physical examinations. He passes with flying colors, no ill effects from his incarceration. So he's a Lockheed test pilot flying U-2s between 63 and 70.
How do you think the incident would define him? How do you think that would shape the rest of his life?
Oh boy.
Defining moment in his life, obviously.
It was definitely a defining moment. He never considered himself a hero. He never considered himself anything but a pilot doing his job. I think he would be very embarrassed that I had gone after clearing his name, because he didn't think he didn't need to be cleared. Right. He knew what he needed to do was everything he did was right. But when I started out on my investigations to find out about my father, I did not go down this path to do what I've done. All I wanted to find out was the truth of what took place so I could answer questions. I wanted to find out why there was misinformation, why there was conspiracy theories, why there were rumors and speculation. What was the truth of what took place? When I'm growing up, people are curious. Oh, Gary Powers' kid. Why did he do this? Why didn't he do that? I don't know. Right? So I wanted to find out the truth so I could answer these questions. And along the way, it ended up that the research I did allowed me to write these books, found the Cold War Museum to honor all Cold War veterans, and to, along the way, just by circumstance, clear Dad's name through the declassification conference that I attended and participated in. The information I got, I submitted to the Air Force Review Board. Hey, this is the new information that's just been declassified. What does this do for Dad's records? And they said, well, hey, we'll promote him to captain, which is what he should have been. He's eligible for the POW medal. And then through some other letter writing, he's eligible for the Silver Star. So that was an added bonus.
Yeah. You touched on this. I'd like you to expand on it a little bit more. The decision to start the Cold War Museum, which is where we sit right now. What's the genesis of that?
Right.
Where did you get all these great artifacts?
What
do you hope that people who come here will get out of this?
Well, I founded the museum in 1996 to honor Cold War veterans, preserve Cold War history, and educate kids. As I had mentioned, I was going to giving lectures in high school students. They thought U-2 incident was U-2 rock band. They just didn't have an idea. I was giving lectures, and I was realizing that the Cold War veterans were not being recognized for their service to our country. So I thought it was very important to do that, which is not the emphasis, the start of the Cold War Museum was those two realizations.
Right.
So in 1996, July, I founded it as a 501c3. I did not want to make money off the back of the veterans. I wanted to do it for the right reasons. In hindsight, I should have owned it.
Right.
But I did the right thing. And along the way, I'm starting to give some lectures. I am starting to reach out to people. I don't mind calling people or sending emails and trying to introduce myself and say, hey, Cold War veteran, this is what we're doing. I need your help. So along the way, I got in touch with crew members of the USS Liberty, got in touch with crew members of the USS Pueblo, got in touch with Nike missile veterans. I got in touch with Army, Air Force, Marine, Coast Guard, Navy, all the service branches, including some government agencies like CIA, NSA, NRO, things like that. And so occasionally I get invited in to give a briefing or a talk. Occasionally I would be invited to a crew members reunion to give a talk to let them know what I'm doing to help this Cold War Museum. At first, when I first start this thing, I'm thinking, 3 years, fundraise $3 million, shouldn't be too hard to do. Well, it took 15 years to get brick and mortar here at Vent Hill. Yeah. And along the way, we first looked at a Nike missile base in Lorton, Virginia. And this is about 2000 and, 8, 9-ish. We're negotiating with Fairfax County Park Authority. The board of the directors at the time, we've arranged for 6 and 7 figures to be donated. The Nike site Park Authority was going to sign a lease or have a lease so that we could occupy that base. The Park Authority wanted the money in the bank. The people who were going to give money wanted the lease signed. No one would give first. And after about 2 or 3 years of negotiating and building this up to a point, it imploded. And on the front page of the Washington Post, museum falls short. And I'm going, 15 years of my life, I'm banging my head on my desk. What have I just done? Oh, this is just horrible. Within a week or two of that article, Vint Hill, this area here, calls us. Hey, we saw what happened with the museum in Fairfax, but come see what we have to offer. We have a building. We can get a $50,000 grant that will be matched by the county. We can give you free rent for the first year, which ended up free rent for 2 years, and we could have a home. So I was able to get this location. And then through the dedication of some of our docents, one of which is here right now, and one who has recently passed away, unfortunately, John DePierno, these guys got it to the point where you see now. And we opened our doors in November of 2011. And we've been open for 14 years now, 13 years now, on the weekends, staffed by volunteers, midweek by appointment for school groups or individuals who can't make it on a weekend. And we're very happy so far with what we accomplished. It's a great museum with a lot of very unique, rare, and hard to acquire artifacts. We started this collection and gathering stuff back in the mid-90s. Things were able to be found. But now, 25 years later, 35 years later, you can't find this stuff. So we were ahead of the curve when we started gathering these items. At first, they were all stored in a warehouse, in like a self-storage facility. And then eventually we were able to store them here on site. But over time, a lot of these buildings are now utilized and have been developed and they have tenants. So we have had to find other places to store our items. So we're always looking for people who have trunks or foot lockers, military veterans, the loved ones, they've passed away, the family doesn't know what to do. Well, consider an artifact donation to the Cold War Museum, or the Americans at Wartime Museum, or the National Smithsonian Museum, or a museum in your backyard. You can help your local museums create displays and exhibits with your family's artifacts. Just don't throw them away. Right. These are treasures that need to be preserved.
Yeah. What is the significance of this place, Vint Hill? Why does this fit with the Cold War?
Right. So Vint Hill Farms Station, it was a listening post, started in World War II. The abbreviated story, because our docents tell it very detailed, the abbreviated story, the farmer was a ham radio operator. And one day he's on his ham radio during, 41, 42 or so, and sees or realizes he can pick up Italian taxi cab communications, German radio transmissions. So one of his friends is a general at the Pentagon, invites him over, hey, Charlie, look at this, what I can do. And the general goes, what? And so they realize that this place, the granite, the soil, the composition, whatever it is under the ground, is a natural receiver. It picks up communication signals from around the world for whatever reason. So the Pentagon authorizes the farm to be purchased from the farmer for, I don't know, a couple $100,000, which is a couple million, if not more today. And so he retires. The government comes in, opens up Vint Hill Farm Station. They have antennas all over the place, not only picking up international signals intelligence, but also have antennas pointed at the Washington, D.C. embassies to pick up embassy communications. So between World War II and the mid-90s, it's a functional Army base receiving, transmitting station operated by NSA, CIA, and ASA, Army Security Agency. So that's the history of this compound, this facility here.
What is it you want people to know about the Cold War? What is important that they know? Mm-hmm.
Yes.
It's kind of an interesting time period. People say no one was shot at or killed. It wasn't like World War I or Vietnam, but that's not necessarily true.
No, it is not true. The Cold War was a hot war.
Right. So what do you want?
And when you film some of the stuff on the walls, you'll see Cold War shoot downs and pieces of plane and crew members who were killed during the line of duty. Right. So I want people to recognize and remember and realize that the Cold War wasn't always cold, and that there was so much more to it than just a Cold War time period. Everything happening in the world today, from the war in Gaza with Israel and Hamas, I know that goes back biblical times, but Israel became a state in 1947. That is a Cold War event, and Palestine did not. And there's been increased tensions for another 50 to 65 years. Okay. The war in Ukraine with Putin and Russia invading Ukraine, well, another Cold War mindset, the East fighting the West. Right. Everything that's happening in the world today is a direct result of the Cold War and its end. And people don't always realize that that happens. History is not rigid.
Right.
History is fluid. World War I leads into World War II, leads into the Cold War, leads into the War on Terror, and it's not just specific dates per se. There are specific dates for timelines, but there's always overlap. And it's very important for people to understand that the Cold War, this 46-year period of time, defined our American way of life and is still doing so today. We are in a new Cold War, not necessarily with Russia. My feeling is that China is the Cold War antagonist at this point in time. Between their outreach in the South China Sea and their territorial claims, to the spies they have all around the world, to their outer space and space missions to the moon on the dark side, we are now entering a new Cold War phase, but this time with China. And what worries me even more is recently China and Russia signed an agreement that they will cooperate with each other. Well, that's not a good sign.
Not good. Yeah. How do you think your father would want to be remembered? 50, 100, 200 years from now in history books?
My dad would want to be remembered as a pilot. That's it. He did a job for his country that he thought he was obligated to do and that he loved while doing. He would never consider himself a hero. He would never consider that he did anything other than follow his orders. And he happened to get caught up in an international incident through no fault of his own.
Right.